Well, hi everybody. We're going to learn about plants for a day or two. So, as you follow along, look for things that are familiar. Maybe even right after you look at this, well, when we talk on Zoom, I'm going to give you some instructions to hopefully look around in your own backyard or front yard or however much you're able to get out of your house and look for some of the things that we're talking about. But what we're going to be doing for at least for today is looking at a plant's structures, so things like flowers, leaves, fruit, so on, and functions of a flowering plant. So what most people don't realize, but you are about to learn, is that most plants that we see, we go outside and walk around, are flowering plants. So you might see things like ivy and grass in your lawn, things like that. And you say, well, those don't have flowers. The thing is, we usually are trimming these plants to the point where we never see the flowers. In fact, the only non-flowering plant we probably see on a day-to-day basis is anything in the pine family, or the conifers as they're called. They have cones instead of flowers. So almost every plant that you typically see is a flowering plant. So we are talking about most plants now. Another division in plants, and we won't get too into classification, but the two main divisions of plants, or that's the term they use instead of phylums in the kingdom Plantae, is this word division, are the vascular and the non-vascular plants. And non-vascular plants are actually not that common for us unless you live near a little creek or a stream or a pond or something like that, and that would be just the moss. So almost every plant we see routinely belongs to this group called the flowering plants. They have the vascular tissue and they have flowers, which is how they reproduce. So what we're going to do is go piece by piece through the different parts. Being vascular, well, the term vascular refers to veins. So we are vascular. So if you think of our our body with our arteries and veins and so on, like that, a typical vascular plant has two primary types of vessels: the xylem, and I know some of you guys learned this in fifth grade. You've mentioned this before. And the job of the xylem, and that's weird spelling, starts with the letter X. The job of the xylem is to carry water and minerals through the plant, generally upwards. And we'll get into later on how that works, because if you think about that, water generally doesn't want to go upwards and wants to go downwards because of gravity. That's another lesson for another day, though. Meanwhile, the other kind of vessels are the phloem tubes, and these carry the sugars. The way I always remember, if I ever get it mixed up, is phloem carries food. So think of that when you think of sugars. And the sugars, if you think way back to the fall, the sugars are being made pretty much in in the leaves. And I say pretty much because sometimes some stems can do photosynthesis as well. And the sugars can actually move both up and down the phloem tubes. So we've got two different kinds of vessels in your typical vascular plant: the xylem and the phloem. And the job of the roots is three-parted job here for the roots, is to anchor the plant. And so if we're absorbing water and minerals, which is the second job, and sending I'll just stick with the water here, sending that water up the plant. So what's kind of strange, as I mentioned before, it's like, well, water doesn't want to go uphill, it wants to go downhill. What happens is during the day, when the sunshine comes out, is the sun would cause evaporation from the plant, and water is very sticky. It likes to stick to itself. Okay, it's called cohesion. It's the cohesive property of water. Water molecules love to stick to each other. So when the sun is evaporating water from the plant, because it's pulling water from above. And I know there was an old game I had when I was a kid called Barrel of Monkeys, where one monkey's arms latch to another and then to another, and they pull each other up out of this little container. So in the same way, when one water molecule evaporates, it pulls up the next one, the next one, the next one, and it creates kind of a chain reaction, pulling water all the way up from the roots. It's called transpiration. It's just a plant word. So again, back to the roots though themselves, they anchor the plant, they absorb the water, which then moves up the plant. And then for many plants, it's a real important place for food storage. We eat some of those roots, in fact, to get food energy from them. Probably the one we might think of first is like potatoes, okay, or carrots. The stem, meanwhile, so usually the most visible part of the plant, other than the leaves and flowers, is to provide support. So again, plants love, obviously, sunshine. So it would be the job of the stem for the plant to grow upwards and try to get it up to where it can get plenty of sunshine. And that's where most of the vascular tissues are. And you see in these diagrams, see the different, all kinds of stuff going on. And most of what you see in these little diagrams, these little tubes and circles and things, is the different kinds of vascular tissue. You see xylem and phloem, those words. You also see the word epidermis, meaning like the skin. If you have some plants like that eventually grow a bark, like a pine tree or something like that, that would be layer after layer after layer of dead cells that were epidermal cells at one point. And in some plants, which still have like a rose bush, where the stem is still green, you'll find some photosynthesis going on in there. Okay, so support contains the vascular tissue and photosynthesis. One of the main characteristics of plants, well, the characteristic of plants is they have to be able to do photosynthesis to be qualified to be in this group. And that's the primary job of the leaves. Again, we spent time a while back, we spent a lot of time actually on photosynthesis. So without just because of time, not redoing that whole lesson, but this is where the bulk of it happens, is in the leaf. And you can see even in the thinness of a leaf, it's like a sandwich. There's all these different layers of plant cells doing the job of photosynthesis. Some of them, there's a lot of space in between to allow gases to flow around. Some of them are just packed in tight just to do the job of photosynthesis. So if you think of leaves, think of them as just being solar collectors. The job of a flower, actually I got a great little lime tree we're going to look at in a video here in a little bit, where the stages of flowers becoming a fruit, is it's actually the reproductive organ for, and here's a fancy word for us all, an angiosperm. That's the fancy word for a flowering plant. So the flower's main job is to aid in reproduction. So very quickly, we've got both male and female parts. That's very typical in a plant. In fact, they call that a complete flower when it has both the male and female parts to it. The male part is called the stamen. It's got the anther and the filament. The anther is where pollen grains form. Meanwhile, the carpel is the female part of the flower, and what it's got is what's called the stigma. And we're actually going to play a little game on a program that I found. When pollen grains go, and you can self-fertilize. If you remember back when we were doing Mendel's P genetics experiments, is you can actually have plants self-fertilize where pollen grains go from the anther to the stigma, and it forms a tube which goes down and fertilizes what's called the ovary, eventually causing all of this to become a fruit. The ovary becomes a fertilized seed, and that's the next generation. Okay? So very quickly, this is the story I just told, but in picture. So pollen grain into the stigma goes down, and actually, as you guys know, many flowers and fruits have many seeds. So like, let's say this was an orange or a lime or even an apple where there's multiple seeds, is all of these get fertilized, and those seeds now actually being fertilized have the potential of life on their own. And it's a new creation. And at some point, it can grow into a whole new plant. Okay? Unless it's been self-fertilized, if this pollen grain came from another plant, the genes, the DNA in this seed would be slightly different than both the mother and the father, the male and the female. It would be a combination of the two. Okay? And then just finishing up, save that for actually the next lesson, and I'll catch up with you guys on Zoom in a little bit, and we'll talk then. All right.